Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about a recent Akka.NET release we did back at the very end of March. This would be Akka.NET 1.564. Now we've done a bunch of releases since maybe 5 or 6, but I wanted to talk about this one in particular because of this change here. We took a dependency on fluent assertions in the Akka.NET test kit, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago possibly, and we've been a happy user of it this whole time. But back in the beginning of 2025, I wrote this blog post talking about FluentAssertions' decision to switch from the permissive MIT license to a commercial license with a new company that had never had a relationship with the project before up until this point. So it's been about a year and a half since then. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why we felt it was necessary to go ahead and drop our dependency on FluentAssertions so we stop distributing it to all of our customers, even though we were pinned on a version that did not have this commercial license. So let's get into that. Now, for a little bit of context here, and I took this back in January 2015, the number's higher now. We were like the second most popular package that used Fluent Assertions, other than one of Fluent Assertions' other packages. So we've been a pretty heavy distributor of Fluent Assertions. Now, this is like a drop in the bucket, the 3 or 4 million installs we drove compared to I think they're up to about 600 million installs now. So it's not like we're responsible for a massive part of the distribution, maybe 1% of it or less. So not a huge amount, but it matters quite a bit to our users who are consumers of Akka.NET. And I don't really have an issue at all with Fluent Assertions wanting to change their license. And, when a package gets popular and a maintainer has to decide whether or not they want to keep working on the project, or maybe they need to be compensated for it in order to keep working on it, it's a fair question to ask. Hence the title of this blog post, which I'll link to in the comments. Is it better to relicense or die? Now, I've got a track record of supporting other open source projects. This is from June of 2021 when Identity Server relicensed. And I think it was probably a great move for Identity Server and Fluent Assertions for their own businesses to go ahead and change their licenses. It basically means that you're going from an open source community where you try to make money doing other ancillary things on the side, like getting consulting gigs or selling open core sort of products like we do with Phobos and the like. This kind of turns the open source project into the product itself. And I don't have an issue with that with other publishers, but I do have an issue with that with the core Akka.NET project for some reasons that I kind of alluded to back in 2022 when Lightbend changed their license. So I made a YouTube video on this that I'll go ahead and link to, but this is the blog post that we wrote back in 2022 when Lightbend, who made the original Akka project, when they changed their license from Apache to the business source license. And the long and the short of it is that Akka.NET's not really impacted because we don't really port anything from Scala Akka anymore. Their designs are fairly divergent from idiomatic C#, so it takes quite a bit to translate them. And we have a lot of our own ideas for things we would like to go through and implement ourselves. So we're not quite as reliant on that partnership with them anymore. And haven't been, and by the time this had happened, we hadn't really had that much of a working relationship with them in years anyway. But one of the things I kind of mentioned down here is that, we haven't really needed Lightbend support, and we're going to continue to support, build, expand, develop our great open source products based on our users' needs and requests. Akka.NET's features, APIs, and experiences have always been blah, blah, blah. It's been nearly 4 years since we wrote this, and we have stuck with that. And a big part of our core values here that I didn't maybe speak to as directly as I should have, but the reason why I started Petabridge is because of the way the .NET ecosystem was when I was running my last company, Marked Up. Let me show you what that looks like. So now we're really going back in time. This is another blog post I'll link to that went to the front page of Hacker News and R Programming and a bunch of other places. This is the profound weakness of the .NET open source ecosystem. Now, Akka.NET by this stage in the game was probably about 7 months old. I started working on the very first lines of my piece of it back around Thanksgiving of 2013. And by the time July 2014 came out, we probably had our first few beta versions up on NuGet. But the gist of this was I was working at a small venture-funded startup, And yet I had to work on implementing things like the SQL 3 specification for Cassandra and an open source driver because there wasn't a first party one. There weren't any good TCP UDP socket server middleware bits out there, doing file locks, all sorts of different things that I all needed to build to kind of deliver these products. I was very, very dissatisfied with this. And I felt like if I had written, marked up in Node.js, which was the hot tech stack at the time, I probably would not have had as many of these problems. And that is unabashedly true, by the way. That was definitely the case. And I kind of bemoaned the state of how pathetic .NET's open source ecosystem was. And I got to bear in mind, this is before .NET Core. This is before lots of other new open source projects kind of made their mark on the .NET ecosystem, including Akka.NET, which was still in its infancy in this stage. This all kind of plays into what we set out to do here at Petabridge. This is from our internal Notion. And this is one of the key documents we show people during hiring and onboarding, and we kind of refer back to it when we're doing our OKRs. These are our explicitly stated values and our mission to our team members. This is what we want to accomplish. So we want to enable users to build the world's most important software. And our vision is to do that by being a leading open source vendor in the .NET ecosystem, mentioned in the same breath as Microsoft, JetBrains, Unity, and others. And my perspective on this is that in order to do open source well, it has to be permissionless for the most part. That means that you really can't deliver on your promise if there's a license and a procurement step involved here. You basically negate a huge portion of your ecosystem. In other words, Petabridge was built to support Akka.NET, and that is historically true. We basically built Petabridge as our entity to support all the requests we were getting for Akka.NET consulting, training, and then eventually support and product work as well. So Petabridge supports Akka.NET, not the other way around. Now, that might be a bad business model. That might be stupid in the eyes of some other maintainers in the ecosystem, but it's what I personally believe because it was something that deeply impacted me at my last company. So this brings me back to our decision to remove fluent-assertions from Akka.NET. I'm totally fine with fluent-assertions changing the license however they want, and I'm fine with other people just pinning an old version of fluent-assertions. But what I don't want to do is be in a position where we become a distributor of a component that is going to ultimately preclude our permissionless sort of innovation model that we are trying to fulfill by delivering Akka.NET under the Apache 2 license to everybody. So that's something that we've had to stand by for years. It's not always been easy. There's been a lot of bumps along the way, like Lightbend changing their license. But it's something that we're committed to because we believe in helping people build the world's most important software. And in order to do that, we think being the platform to do that requires that we be free to use and permissionless to try. So that's it for today. And that's why we've decided to go ahead and remove fluent-assertions. No shade on them at all. You can go ahead and feel free to use them in your own projects if you want. But going forward, we're just going to go ahead and use the vanilla XUnit assertions and unit throughout all of our test kit implementations going forward. Thanks for your time. Well, that'll do it for this video. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to check the description to find links to other resources we may have included. So blog posts, GitHub code samples, other videos, so on. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. We'll catch you next time. Thank you very much.